go ahead and
You
introduce
know,
yourself.
and Pat did say he was coming, so he's walking the door any minute now. So you asked us to come and talk about an update on the TIF districts, and then I think also some question about affordable housing options and some ways to get there, and Pat can speak on that too in terms of what our experiences have been in other places. But this is really the same document you saw last year. I think this is the same group, right? Everybody,
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to bore you with all the details. I did throw in there some new interest rate, just some updates so you guys get a feel for what's going on in the municipal market. So if you look at pages 3 and 4, page 3 gives you sort of an update of where the one-year note market is here. And actually the city, as long as I've been working with you all, has never really done a short-term financing, but had you had the need to go out and do a short-term borrowing, and some folks do that related to construction projects, where instead of issuing bonds right away until they know the end cost, they'll do a one-year note. But this gives you an impression of what's happened over the last year and a half, and it's been ugly, because we were at 30 basis points, and now we're up to, you know, the 3.5%, 4% range relative to the one-year note, and that's really related to battling inflation. But where we've been before with the city is the long-term fixed rate market, and that's on page 4. And just so you guys have a feel for what this looks like today. The green line is that the interest rate over time, and so it starts off with the first year and then goes all the way out to the 30th year if you're issuing a bond issue. Interest rates, bonds are sold in individual years, and so each year has an interest rate to it. So you can see there as you go from the year 1, we're looking at 3%, and you see how it dips down, and that's what they talk about, the inverted yield curve, relative to them fighting inflation. So they're trying to get the short-term yields up fast to slow things down in the economy, and this is the impact of that over time. The orange line is normal, and that's the average, and that's what we've seen historically. This gives you a feel for where we're at currently, the average, and then you see that purple line down below. That's where we were at January 1 of 22. So they talk about interest rates going up. The gray bar area is the max and the minimum of where it's been. So it really isn't extreme in terms of where it was if we go back and look previous to this time range of 1991 and 91 to 70. You can see in the teens in terms of interest rates. So we took advantage of areas we could specifically to the TIF debt, and we're going to talk about a few of those options that I think last year the last one we completed was the refinancing of the University Point Dana Mount TIF. Squeaked in there right at the last minute as rates were going up, still took advantage of some savings. You'll have another crack of the apple in 2 years if we decide to do that again. But really, for the most part, outside of the TIF district out in front of here, which is Central Park, all of them have been refinanced at this point in time, and Rookwood. So Rookwood, we have the option. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but in terms of the interest rate world, that's where we're at today. I left this in here from last year. I wasn't sure if anybody knew was going to be here in terms of TIFs. Maybe at this time, do you have any questions relative to TIF districts? How they're used, the process, the mechanics?
It probably would be helpful to just do a primer, especially for folks watching from home.
Okay. In general, what this is a diversion of the property taxes from a base year. And so, for example, we'll use Factory 52 as an example. There, council passed a resolution that froze a value in time, which we always refer to as the base year. And so, for example, that base year might be $500,000. Once that property is improved, from the period that the council has passed that resolution for a period of 30 years or maybe shorter, but typically we've done 30-year TIFs here, those property taxes on the new value is diverted. So that $500,000 is what the base year is. If they put a $20 million building on top of that, all those property taxes are now diverted to the TIF fund, with one exception, and that's your school compensation arrangement. And so each one of your deals has a different school compensation agreement, and that money is diverted from the TIF fund first, usually, to pay for debt service, to pay the schools, and then typically debt service or the project improvements. A lot of times you have to issue debt because you're trying to improve the site up front. with the value, and then those property taxes over time. We do a calculation to see what happens with those revenues and what it can support in terms of the new project. Very, usable tool across Ohio. Every community's been using them since they're implemented. They work great in terms of redevelopment projects because typically redevelopment projects have more of a need for some sort of a subsidy or improvement to help the garage, something of that nature, parking. Generally, that's what we see around here. So in a nutshell, that's what a TIF is for the city, and you've utilized them very well. All of your TIFs have performed. We have none that's a default. They've all been structured really well. They all have different school district arrangements, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you go past 10 years, you need to get the schools involved and have an arrangement with them where you work with them to compensate them to some point. And those are completely different of every single one you have. There's a different arrangement each time, and it really kind of depends on what is your goal, what are you trying to accomplish, and then hopefully working with them, and they've been great to work with over time because we've done some really good deals that have paid off. Quality Inn is another example. We didn't use a TIF in place, but there's also CRAs that you have available to you too that we utilize with the developments. And those are community reinvestment areas.
You made the comment about none of ours are in default. How common is that?
Well, we hear about them across the country. Sometimes they won't go in default because you have minimum service payments from the developer. Mm-hmm. So an example is Rookwood. Rookwood, there's an arrangement there that the owner, or in this case the developer, has agreed to pay the higher of taxes or debt service on that financing. And so if there's a valuation mismatch or a valuation decline in the site, you might have a situation where a default could come into play, yet in this instance you have that minimum service payment from the developer who covers the shortfall and makes the payment on the bonds. Mm-hmm. It's a very common arrangement when it comes to TIFs. Yet to be seen, for example, what's going to happen in the office market, valuation market, but excuse me, there's expectation of a lot of issues related to financings of office coming down the pipeline here. So, we'll see, but all of yours are in great standing. They're actually cash flowing very well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Woodside's here.
Yes.
Why don't we jump into the grid? And we put this together for you a couple years ago on page 8. So this lists every single TIF that you have and the amount of value that's exempted on it. What is being collected from that TIF currently? What is the school compensation? The original date of issuance on the bonds, how much is outstanding, how much was originally issued, how much is outstanding now, the interest rate, the debt service requirement, and then the end of year balance each year. So let's just take Linden Point, which is also Paycor, combined together. So that one was created, first TIF year was 2007 tax year. There is value there of $43 million. And so if you remember that site, wasn't a whole lot there, redevelopment site. This was a perfect example of how a TIF should work. So 43 million in value now. There was $1 million, a little over $1 million in property tax generated from that site alone. We paid the school district in that situation $253,000. And then if you skip down below what's in terms of left on the financing, we refinanced that one a couple years ago at a 2.69% interest rate, pretty low compared to today. And so our debt service requirement for both Linden Point and Paycor is $449,000, and we have about $310,000 left over. So Pat's going to talk a little bit about project TIFs and the ability to use some of this revenue for other purposes. That one is a bit restricted, just because of the formation of that, the way it was done. But we can accelerate debt service on that in that situation, pay off the bonds earlier. There's some areas that can be used on that we've talked to the city about, but generally they're typically restricted for the financing, and then after that, I would say consult counsel. So that's Linden Point in that situation there. You see down below where it says school district compensation. In that situation, it's a flat 25%. And if you go across each one of those TIF districts, they all are different. And so we are engaged with your city auditor to help track these and make sure that the school districts are paid on time, that the calculation's right. And I think that, since we've gotten engaged, it's really helped with the school district. They feel happy that things are happening on time and getting paid when they should. If you look at University Station, right next to that, that is a school compensation that's different, obviously. So it's 55% of what the school district millage would have been in that situation. Cornerstone's a bit different. There's a 23 mil charge off from what they would get from their normal millage. Central Park is 100% of what they would have gotten, so there's no deduction from what their normal taxes would have been. Rookwood is a bit complicated, but in essence, they get 55% of what their millage would have been. And then in PLK, it gets even more complicated because the value is exempted for 15 years at 100%, and the school is going to get compensation in the back end of that deal.
So right now, the school's not getting compensated at all. That was the agreement they made.
That is the agreement. They're getting a very minor portion on PLK. When you do a community reinvestment deal, you can't exempt the land, so it's just the building improvements. Mm-hmm. So there's some revenue they're getting out of there. It's not a significant amount. Probably, I would say it is more than what they would have gotten had you not done the deal, but it's, they understand that the bulk of that is in the back end of that transaction.
15 years, thank you.
So I'll just highlight a few of these other ones. University Station, which is that second column there, you can see that there's excess revenues of about $343,000 a year coming off that TIF. It's doing very well. I think the last phase, or one of the phases, came online about a year and a half ago. So that value is doing well. We refinanced that one last year. Cornerstone, you see a negative $29,000. That was a deal we refinanced a couple of years ago as well, and restructured that to help the building really succeed, if you will. The developer in that situation, we talked about minimum service payments. They were going to have to come out of pocket to the tune of, what was it, a couple $100,000? I think $190,000 a year, I believe. So obviously that would trickle down to the tenants, make the building even less desirable to stay in. And so we did a refinancing there just to help cash flow it out. And so that deal's working well now. It's just very short in terms of the annual payments that really don't come out of pocket. There's a little bit of money there in a fund that helps pay that debt service. So that one is probably the one that's the skinniest in terms of excess revenue. Central Park, there was excess about $84,000. Rookwood, we're really in essence flat there because we have a catch-up payment we have to make to the school district, which we hope to do each year, as long as that value stays the same. And then PLK isn't on the tax roll yet. It should be on there starting next year in terms of the value.
Can you talk a little bit more about how, and it looks like it's just Factory 52 that is using the CRA with the TIF, is that correct?
Correct.
Can you talk about how those work in
How they mirror up?
conjunction?
Yeah, it sounds like they shouldn't work together, right? What you have there is you have the TIF that's there for 30 years. And depending on the amount of the CRA exemption, you've used 100% here. You could use something less, like called 75%. In that case, if you're only exempting 75% of the vertical value, the new value, the other portion would be picked up by the 30-year TIF. And so if you think about it in layers, you have the CRA, then you have the TIF that's capturing anything that's not exempted out. Now, in essence, really, for 15 years, the bulk of that value is going to be exempted through the CRA period. or the allowance. Years 16 to 30 is where you're going to pick up your value with the TIF. And that's where the revenues will come in for the TIF district or for the school if there's a compensation arrangement of that nature. The quality insight was set up that way. The initial proposal was that the site would be exempted for 15 years, 100%. Then the school would make up everything from years 16 to 30. Because that's how the layer of the TIF works with the CRA.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Common tool as well. I mean, it's been utilized a lot. You know, when you come into these development deals, you're trying to figure out what is it you're looking to accomplish in order to make the deal happen. And every developer has got different needs, if you will. In that case, you know, that would have been a different structure if PLK needed a parking garage, right? They didn't need one there. They were able to surface park it, which helped out keep the cost down more and help drive more value to the project to make it a better, you know, a better product to the market. Any other questions about the grid? Hopefully this was helpful to you. Mm-hmm. We update this every year, so if you don't invite me back next year, I'll still give it to you. We do it as part of our service to the city, and give you guys an update on it.
So can you talk about the flexibility of using TIFs at all, or would that be Andy?
I'm going to invite my friend up on that one.
Okay.
Because I'll say, I won't say anything, but we like to get creative, but there's certain requirements on some of this that we're not allowed to utilize. So, Pat, why don't you come up and talk about the differences between maybe excess revenue from University Station, which I think is a little more flexible, or one of these TIFs that are flexible compared to others in terms of the use of the excess.
Well, how about this? Instead of talking about the specifics of these particular projects, because they are driven by the documents and legislation and you know, however it was implemented, but just as a little background, I won't try not to repeat Andy's description, but the term TIF includes a few different types of TIFs, but they basically accomplish the same thing that Andy described. You're able to basically divert tax revenue or the incremental tax revenue to various projects. And all of the, well, one's a little unique, but generally the projects that we have here in the city of Norwood are what are more typically called project TIFs. And project TIFs have their own set of requirements, but the TIF revenues from a project TIF, those are able to be used for what are called public infrastructure improvements. Public infrastructure improvements include everything you typically think of a public infrastructure improvement, roads, sidewalks, utilities, that kind of stuff, but it also does include property acquisition, includes demolition, and some other expenditures that I would consider to be site prep in order to provide a platform to develop the property, which is sort of what the idea of TIFs is really supposed to kind of advance. So that's generally what we have here. The actual public infrastructure improvements that are allowed to be financed with revenues from a particular TIF are described in the legislation that form the TIF. We usually try to keep it pretty broad. There's sometimes a project in mind where we have debt to be issued and that TIF revenue will first be used for that project. But we may keep it a little more expansive so that, for example, if we have something over here at Central Park, there's extra TIF revenue, we could use it for the roads, the sidewalks, utilities, and things around that area as the project basically gets developed and you have more, call it infrastructure needs. So that's the typical type of TIF. There's another TIF that people always say a TIF district, but a TIF district is a very particular type of TIF. That type of TIF is a lot of times used for single-family housing development, so we don't see that here. It has a sort of another component to it. As Andy described, typically TIF revenues can be used for your project for the schools. A TIF district, you have to potentially use some of that revenue to compensate the county. So it's usually not ideal from a financial perspective. But those types of TIFs have a little bit broader uses. You can do your public infrastructure improvement, but you're also able to divert some of those taxes for housing, for example. There's a third type of TIF that is the most flexible. People call it a 41 TIF because it's under section 570941 of the Ohio Revised Code. And that is the most flexible of all the TIFs. That allows you to use your TIF revenue for what they call urban redevelopment, which is, the term urban, you think of more densely populated areas, but really it's anything that a city, municipality decides constitutes urban redevelopment. So you'd have some kind of plan, you can put a TIF in place, you can really use it for whatever you want. You can give that money right into a private development if you want, you can also use it for public infrastructure improvements. That type of TIF is a little more complicated because the municipality, or the city in this case, has to take ownership of that property. We can do that on paper pretty briefly, but it's not always ideal. For example, the Quality Inn site, that has had some environmental problems. Maybe you don't want to be in the chain of title for a project like that, yada, 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 whatever. Lots of legal stuff you don't care about. But those are the three types of TIFs. There's more, but those are the sort of three kind of areas of expenditure, I guess, that I would think of usually when I'm looking at a project. And back to, I think, the initial question, with the existing TIFs we have here, it's pretty much public infrastructure. There are some limitations about how directly, let's just say that revenue should benefit the property that is subject to the TIF. Roadways, I think, is a little more broad. It doesn't have to be abutting the property, but usually to mitigate, call it traffic in the area, or sewer or water or electric that goes to that property, even if it's a substation or a pump or something else that's not next to it but serves it. So that's sort of the general idea with TIFs and how those diverted revenues can be used. Did that answer the questions that you have, or just general background?
Yes.
But if you have specific questions about that, happy to answer whatever I can do to help. That was a lot, I know.
I feel like I need to go to school to
I
really understand it fully.
I went for a long time and I still don't understand
Right.
some days.
In terms, I believe you were here for one of the conversations that we had in terms of trying to find ways of providing support for affordable housing. And some of the challenges that we have with that here.
Yeah.
And I was curious if you could speak to that and what some of the potential options might be.
Yeah, so the reality with those types of projects, or any project, is a lot of times it comes down to money. Do you have money? And the affordable housing topic, that's kind of a broad term as people would generally use it, but it's a pretty specific type of project in, call it the legal and the financial world. They're modeled very differently from a typical project because you don't have the same revenues that can really independently support a project. And so affordable housing has a lot of different tools. I can talk about the TIF in a second, but you probably see at least references to it in various articles. But there are tax credits that are available for certain types of multifamily housing developments that limit the income. It's usually, say, some percentage of average median income. You have to limit it to that segment, economic segment. So there's the tax credits, a few different types of tax credits that you can use that have their requirements. There are types of tax exempt bonds that you can issue that it can be used to finance affordable housing. They have similar, call it, requirements. They're the little different numbers as far as the percentages of AMI and the percentage of your project that has to be dedicated to that segment of the population. So that, though, like I said, it's a very specific type of project that developers have a pretty specific area of expertise because they know how to basically utilize those various financial tools. And, if anybody has questions about it, there are people obviously around town that are pretty active in that area that, again, it's usually somebody with specific experience in doing that from the financial side of it because it takes a lot of, called financial engineering. From the TIF side of things, I know that, I forget who, but someone had referenced the city of Cincinnati, and you see a lot of their assistance with affordable housing. The city of Cincinnati has, again, back to money, they have a big advantage where they have set up TIF districts, which again, that has more of the flexibility where you can use TIF revenues from a TIF district for housing renovations. It doesn't have to be affordable, just for housing. And so what the city has done historically is that they've put TIF districts in very large swaths of area downtown. And they did it in a way that, I don't have to go into it. Basically, they're big. They basically are able to utilize a lot of the incremental tax revenue that comes from, called the business district. And the TIF districts are drawn in such a way they can then use that money for areas of town that are more housing focused. And it's just the magnitude of the development and the dollars you're talking about. They generate a lot of money over time. If it's 30 years, here, when we usually do a TIF, obviously the most incremental value occurs when you build something. And so you want to establish your TIF before you build something, pretty close to it, so then you jump up and you get a full, say it is 30 years, 20 years of your largest leap in incremental value to capture that TIF revenue. They've done it in a way that over time, there's just pretty consistently new development of a very high dollar value in downtown. So they have those districts set up where they capture that money, and they have basically a piggy bank to use for that. It's hard to predict those things unless you have something like a downtown urban area where you don't even know for sure then, but it's statistically more likely to happen there than it would be, say, if you did it out on the street in Norwood, because you can't do it twice. Is at least currently under the law, so you can't put a TIF district down and renew it at the end. We'll see what the city of Cincinnati does at the end of theirs, where somebody goes and changes that law. But you don't just want to say, hey, we're all in a TIF district now, let's throw it out there and try to get some money, because one, you don't know when it's going to happen, and two, you don't want to limit yourself in the future to utilize certain types of TIFs. But that's kind of how that's done in other places. So did that answer your question, though?
Yes.
I'm sort of rambling on a little bit there at the end.
One of the other understandings that I have is that Cincinnati has a lot more flexibility because they're a charter city. And my understanding is we have more limitations with what we can do.
Generally speaking, that's true, but I wouldn't say that, at least in regards to the TIF, they have, much greater flexibility than you have. I mean, I think that it's unfortunate or just reality, but the money aspect of it, I think, is what you'll see.
It's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that's just the biggest challenge, where you get the money. I mean, I think a lot of people have a lot of projects they'd like to do, whether it's affordable housing or other infrastructure, or whatever you'd like to do in the community, but it's getting that money, and that's why TIFs are a nice tool here, especially because it is something you can use that's driven by revenues that don't exist, and it kind of goes hand in hand with new development, but it's that hand-in-hand element of it where if you don't have a certain development there and just extra funds that have been accumulated over time, it's hard to just put something in place that generates those funds. But yeah, I haven't seen anything that really would limit you relative to the city of Cincinnati as far as the TIF revenues go. Okay. Now, just your general money and your general fund or other things you want to do, yeah, they can basically kind of do what they want, I guess, as far as being a charter city.
Okay. So, I feel like Pat said that he feels like right now our TIFs are all looking pretty good in terms of how they're fleshing out.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, you never know. He's looking at the downside. I'm looking at the positive side here. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the current status of them, the life that's left in them. Two other points I wanted to just lay out here for you. If you recall, a couple years ago, we extended the Norwood TIF for an additional 30 years. And so you have that ability with certain TIF districts when they hit $1.5 million in revenue. And so we put that in place as an option for you. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but under current law, at that point in time, you had to do it or you lost the opportunity. So just want to stress with the Rookwood TIF, when we extended it, under law, you have to reimburse the school district 100%, but it gives you the flexibility to have that revenue stream for other projects down the road, should it come up.
So that was before my time. Why was that extended another 30?
Just to give you the flexibility.
Okay.
Because if you didn't do it then you couldn't do it at all.
At all.
But let's just say, for example, you get to the end of the current life, doesn't mean you have to keep it out there. You could say, hey, that's great. We don't see any benefit for this, but really it was just the flexibility to make sure you have the option to do it. The other ones that are out there that are getting close that we watch are University Station and Cornerstone, and actually Linden Point. Actually, Linden Point's two different TIFs, isn't it?
31.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool. Now
Yeah, Cornerstone and University Station would be the next ones that have the opportunity, unless they change that threshold. There's some discussion that other communities are like, hey, that's not fair. We want to lower that level, and if they do that, we'll let you know. But again, it just gives you flexibility to have that option if you need it.
Right, because that was one where you couldn't extend a TIF an extra 30 years in the state for some project somewhere in the state. That was like
I'm sorry, Easton. Yeah.
Easton, that's it. If the revenues were in a certain, window, and it was designed for that project up there, but Rookwood happened to fall within that. And so we thought, okay, we'll try it. Well, let's do that too. I
think the city of Cincinnati did that as well.
It really was a special interest kind of.
Yeah, there was a lot of communities who took advantage of that option.
Yeah, right.
I was just say, one other thing too, and Andy can get into this more, but one of the overall concepts, especially the city of Cincinnati or here, or with the municipality in general, is that real property taxes are not the biggest source of income. Or I don't know about the numbers, but if you can incentivize a project by giving up a relatively small amount of property taxes in order to bring residents and jobs, there's really quite a return on investment for the city. So with Brookwood, if you can basically utilize that for maintenance and whatever else you can to keep that project viable while still compensating the schools all their money, the income tax really is quite the dividend that you're going to see on some of these projects in the future. So that's a big part of the math of it that helps the city to benefit from.
At hotel taxes too, for example, your share of that, those are the big drivers for you.
Is there going to be an opportunity to refinance the Rookwood one at any point?
Yeah, back with the tax law changes a couple of years ago, the IRS hated the ability for governments to do what they call an advance refunding, meaning if you saw the opportunity, you could call the bond before the call date one time in its life. So for example, in that year, you have a 30-year bond issue. You kind of look at the metrics and say, yeah, this makes sense for us to call this now before the call date. I'll stay away from the mechanics, but it's a math game to see if it makes sense percentage-wise. They took that ability away. They said, all right, no more advance refunding before the call date. Now you have to wait till the call date. So if you see there across the optional redemption, that one is coming up 6/1/25, and believe me, we're watching it very close. Because we can refinance that for some savings, get the school district caught up because there is a bit of a accumulated deficiency under that deal, and that would be the opportunity there. Also with Central Park would be another one there. It's 6%. There might be an opportunity there as well to save some money. We have the very bottom line. We have sort of utilized the Port Authority strategically, if it made sense. And so we utilized them on the refinancing on Linden Point and Paycor, on Cornerstone, and we utilized them on the PLK deal. We didn't utilize them on the University Station transactions. It didn't give us any value in that situation to look at that. So, we'll look at that option too in the future. If it makes sense, we'll use it. If it doesn't, just keep on doing it the way we've been doing it.
Does anyone else have questions about all this stuff? Does anyone in the audience have any questions about this? Yes.
I would just like to know who the two speakers are.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm Pat Woodside, and I serve as counsel, or outside counsel to the city on some bond and tax incentive work across that.
The 80% or the municipal advisors.
Thank you.
I have a question. Is after you set up the TIF, and then 5 years later, let's say, can the property value change and go up, and then does the city get more money?
Yeah. Yeah, you start basically a baseline when you establish it, and then wherever it goes up or down after that, everything above the initial
Baseline.
Yeah, that the taxes generated from that are converted to either infrastructure or schools.
Within the rules.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll keep going, and then at the end, if there were to be funds left in there, then the city gets them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? No? All right, thank you very much. So we'll see you next year, if not before.
Say after the model
Right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right, the next item is vacant properties. This has been quite a whirlwind, the vacant property issue. Noah I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'm going to just be very careful. He and I had a long conversation about this, and he put out a request through the code bank, other municipalities on what they do, and he shared it with me. So as of today, 14 different communities have responded, and of those 14, all right, let me see here. 3 of them have a vacant property registration ordinance. 11 do not. Math. Has the ordinance resolved the issues it was intended to resolve? So of those 3, the answers were yes, for record-keeping purposes, yes, and sometimes. And then got some prices for what the registration fee schedule is. None of the 3 required additional hiring for the program. And then we got copies of a few folks who had different ordinances. I did find Forest Park uses something called ProChamps, and that is a company that works exclusively online. And what they do is they go through property records and they manage the vacant property list themselves for the municipality. The way it works with Forest Park is they have a lower registration fee. It's $150. Norwood's is $900 for the first year. Is that right? I think it's $900.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. So theirs is much less, $150. And then of that $150, the city of Forest Park gets $120, and ProChamps gets $30. So they get a small fee. So on paper, that was sounding like a pretty good deal to me, but Noah brought up some concerns which I think are appropriate for us to consider. One of it being, how do we handle people that are snowbirds who are gone for 3 months? Are they being penalized? Are they needing to do a vacant property? What about someone who's doing their best to actually sell the property, but the market has shifted, so they're not able to do that? So I'm not sure that it's worth throwing the whole thing out, but I do respect that he had some concerns with how that would work, and just kind of wanted to bring it here to have a fuller conversation with you guys about it. I think it would be helpful to have a list. I know that in my conversations with Chief McCabe, that was, something that is of value to the fire department for obvious reasons. In some cities have, the fire chief gave me it's almost a 100-page document of sort of like best practices for vacant properties, and it's a very long list of things that you would do, and there'd be certain postings outside that indicate what the property is like. That sounds pretty laborious for us with the staffing challenges that we have. Sorry, I've went down the fire safety, so pull back out. One of the other concerns that Noah had was that this might be penalizing folks that we might not want to be penalizing, and might not be capturing the folks that we want it to capture. If someone, say Quality Inn as an example, that guy didn't care that property was vacant, and didn't matter how much, whether the fee was $900 or, $1 million, like he wasn't gonna do anything. So would that just be a waste of our time and energy if it's not kind of capturing everyone from in an even space? So that's where I am with the vacant properties and the research that I've done. Oh, and then you wrote you fixed I drafted.
Yeah, after coming out of the last meeting, we talked about this. I took Hamilton's and adapted it to us. Hamilton's going through it. Hamilton's only applies to commercial, doesn't apply to residential. And Noah, as soon as I sent that out, Noah called me and said, I got some real concerns with this. And I said, I do too, but this is what I was asked to put together. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, the Hamilton one, it comes down crazy hard in ways that are really not necessary. What the best path forward is, I don't know. And primarily, I think that's a question for the people in the building department that would monitor this and keep track of it, and just to get a sense of what the parcels are. I mean, quality, it wasn't going to make a difference. Perry and Derrick, it wasn't going to make a difference. If you do things and add, there are times when you're like, oh, they're not doing it, so we're just going to add this fee after 5 years onto the property tax records. Put a lien on the property for it, that makes it that much harder to sell because a new owner has to pay for that in order to clear title. And so that's really the question is what are the properties, would it be helpful? I think 10 years ago, yeah, something to push people, because there are a lot that like, oh, I had the property, the market's down, I'm not going to sell it, I'll just leave it empty. And I can see that in a market like we have today, that, okay, if I can't just leave it empty until I get the right time to sell, I'm just going to rent it out. And then we've made it possibly a single-family home into a rental property. And then it's harder to shift it off of that. Instead of paying $900, I'll just rent it out. And there's other things. I don't know how many parcels there are that are really an issue. How many are not being actively marketed or not, they're not following through on a demolition permit or on the building permits to fix it up. And I just don't know. And that's when the Hamilton one, there were a lot of weird things in there. Like if you're going to demolish a property, you had to post escrow with the city for the full amount of the demolition, which I'm reading that and thinking, well, nobody's demolishing a building unless it's vacant. So, and I can't imagine having, in order to pull a demo permit, you have to escrow the full amount of the cost, because I can only imagine what like quality or a playing card would have been like to, oh yeah, we'd love to do that, but here, let's put all the cash, give all the cash to the city up front, and you guys hold on to it, and then we'll pay them when the whole thing is done. There's a lot of things in that Hamilton ordinance that seem really strange to me. But that's really the question is, what are the parcels that are out there? I mean, there are a lot of situations where, you start renovation on a property, you pull the permits and you start, and then there's a pause, and partly it's just that's the way contractors are. They will start and then go and do something else and come back when they're done with the other thing. And some of it's, getting the materials or getting whatever stuff you need to get in, can be an issue. So parcel, there's properties that can take a long time to do. And, do you want to penalize somebody for taking more than 6 months to do to do $100,000 or $150,000 flip on a house? And there's things like the old, I can never remember the name of the street. It's on Montgomery Road. It's down between Cameron and whatever the street south of Cameron is. What is that? Slane, on Slane. There's the one at Slane in Montgomery, the old furniture place with all the glass in the front. It's just got broken windows. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know who owns it. I don't know if anybody owns it or if it's in an estate or in bankruptcy somewhere, but clearly that thing's got issues. I don't know if a vacant building license project is going to make a difference. So I just don't know. I mean, that's a question of, I would defer to the building department on what they think would be the most helpful moving forward. Especially as opposed to passing Hamilton's version of it, because council thinks that that's the right thing to do. Because that's the way things just don't get done. So, and I know it's got concerns about, so maybe we should just repeal the thing altogether. But I would think that there's some way, you pull a permit, it's only so good, it sits vacant and nobody's doing anything. I can see something where nothing happens for a year. Well, maybe we should register that and we're going to charge you $150 or $300 or something. If you're just going to sit for another year, then we just want to be on your radar as, no, you should do something about this. But I just don't know as a practical matter what the parcels are that are the issue, and what those issues are and how best to resolve them.
Are we still waiting to hear back from the building department on our questions with?
I didn't have any more, I didn't see that you added any questions to the document, so I didn't submit that to them yet?
I haven't gotten that done. Well, I think, like, their weigh-in is gonna be important on that. If it's something that, hey, we got a complaint, or we drive down Montgomery Road and we see this building that has been empty, but like, logistically, what can they handle at this point? And what is the major concern? Is it a fire hazard because it's vacant? Is it because there's broken windows and there's animals going in and out? Is it because it's making the sidewalk unsafe for people to walk by? I mean, to me, those are legitimate concerns, but at this point, like, you know, what can the building department do going forward? And what is the best way to handle it in their opinion?
Right, and part of that, I mean, a lot of the things that make vacant properties a problem are just the property maintenance issues, and that you don't need a vacant building thing to apply to. The vacant
Right.
building is really more somebody, it's just empty. It's not obviously a disaster area, but nobody's doing anything with it. The other thing about it is, we're still going through the Hamilton one is, you know, we're gonna charge Xavier for the plaza because most of it's empty. You know, it's like that kind of thing. Is that where we want to be on this? So, but yeah, so, you know, for each parcel, it's a question, call, and I just haven't done it, call the builder, hey, what's going on with this one? You know, you issue the orders, do you know about it? Is it on your radar? Is it, we just can't serve the people? There is no owner, because that happens. Something that tends to happen, so.
Yeah, I know right now the building department does not have, Mark has been at Factory 52 like 24/7, just getting that stuff taken care of. So adding something to their plate sounds not reasonable right now.
Yeah, and quite honestly, the solution might be to like look at, let's hire another code enforcement officer or two who can just spend more time on all of the things that, you know, all of those property maintenance issues across the board.
It seems like sort of during COVID, we went into a reactive space, which is probably appropriate. We didn't have someone going around with a clipboard, you know, walking up and down every street. They were just, if they got a call about tall grass and that sort of thing, that was more of the way that we were working. I'm wondering if we have the capacity to be more proactive at this point. And would something like Pro Champs be better than hiring someone ourselves? I mean,
Well,
because
the Pro Champs is there to maintain, and I don't know if they pull from the, you know,
maybe
the
foreclosures and,
you know, foreclosures, and they pull probably utility shut-offs
Yeah.
and that kind of thing, and it's like, that's just maintaining a list of the vacant properties as opposed to addressing the ones that are actually,
that are problematic.
you know, if it's foreclosed and then the bank puts it up for auction in 3 months, that's not, you know, that's the way it's supposed to work, and having them pay an extra $150 doesn't really accomplish anything other than raising revenue, I don't think. So that's really the question, is where you want to spend your time and energy. I don't know if Pro Champs do anything as far as like tracking and policing property maintenance issues.
They're not
You know,
policing,
dangerous,
but they
yeah.
definitely track.
Right.
Well, and make sure it's balanced too, like the concern of like quality in, you know, we can find them as much as we want, but we won't get any money, but then someone who's just owns one property, you know, and they're the ones actually having to pay. Or looking at long-term, if someone wants to come buy a huge property and there's all these fees tacked onto it. You know, can we write it well enough that it's balanced, that like the, you know, smaller property owners aren't the ones having to do all these fees, while the people who own the huge sites are just kind of skipping free.
Well, what does the committee feel like next steps are? Where do we want to put our efforts?
I'd just like to hear back from the building department and see what is actually realistic at this point in time. I mean, you know, what is feasible? Like, if we just get a complaint, okay, we'll just start tracking that. I mean, that's like, if I get a complaint, like, wondering about this building, all right, I'm checking with the building department, or, you know, X, Y, and Z. then it, you know, goes back to documentation, who's doing the documentation, who has access to the file, so we're all on the same page, and what's the list and the updates and all that, but, so it's kind of questions like that of what is realistic in their wheelhouse at this point in time.
And even the question of what did they think, if there's something council can do
Yeah.
that would add a useful tool for them. I mean, that would be one of the, you know, because that's really, they're the ones that are going to have to do it. So what's the thing that would be helpful for them to resolve these issues? Because I know they don't like them either.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I resent you the invitation. Trying to resend you the invitation. I think I did. Anything else on vacant properties from folks here? No? Anyone here would like to make a comment or question about vacant properties? Sweet. Okay, Xavier Student Housing. We made a few changes on this, and then we did, this being the friendly reminders about behavior in the springtime, and then the other is the donated items from Salvation Army. We're able to get a sign-up link with them. And so we'll be putting this on social media, and then I'll be making some copies and dropping off this weekend. Thoughts, comments, questions about this? Cool. And then we'll see how this goes, how this works for using it again. And it's possible we can do the same thing again in a month when the leases are out. The other thing, I ran out of time and I didn't get to call. There were, not this past Monday, but the previous Monday, there were a few more calls in for loud parties. No citations were given. I'm gonna start paying attention to which locations those are and see if we're getting recidivism from certain places. And then the new police chief and I are gonna get together, and this will be part of our conversation about just what's their philosophy about that. We've got a long list of things to catch up on. And I have not heard back about the ambassador. Have you?
Last I heard was, she said the SGA canceled the position.
Oh, all right.
And then I'm waiting to hear back on contacting someone at their sustainability group too as well. They have names but no contact info.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's turning over with the new school year
New school
too,
year.
so. I also reached out to the individuals, interns who work at the Nexus Gardens on Xavier's campus to try and see if I can, they know sustainability, trying.
Knocking on a lot of doors.
Yeah.
Poking a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the only other thing was, were you able to reach out to Brian about the leases?
I haven't heard back yet,
Okay,
but yeah, I'll try again.
all right. It might be too late for this year, but maybe next year.
Yeah.
I don't know, I still see a bunch of signs out for.
What about the leases? Mm-hmm. What about the leases?
Oh, sorry, what about the leases? To see if they would be willing to put in not having the beer tables in the front yard in the leases of so asking the
And you got
landlord.
special property people that just people that you know that are Xavier Housing that you're going to target as far as asking them to put them in the lease? Like you have a list of Xavier homes, I guess?
One of them reached out to me, he owns over 44 properties now, and he asked the city to ban beer pong tables in yards. And that conversation has gone in a lot of circles, and so we're kind of going back to him about how he would feel if it was his responsibility of putting it in the lease and not the city's.
Because we don't want to legislate it. So
Yeah,
we
we don't.
would like for, if it's something that bothers him, that he could. Cool. Anything else with housing? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned donations from the Salvation Army or for?
No, sorry, for.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
and you, okay,
That makes
it's a
sense.
flyer that, it's up there. We have a partnership, makes it sound more important than it is. But the Salvation Army is going to have a dedicated truck that will pick up from the students. We're trying to reduce the big move-out days where they just dump a whole bunch of stuff in the street. Some of it is salvage, some of it's nice stuff, some of it's garbage. But if we can pull the usable stuff out, so it's a QR code that the student clicks on, then they can schedule to have the item picked up from there.
But I did think you said from, so I just.
Oh, yeah.
What are they donating? Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thanks for making sure I was clear. All right, I think that's it. And then last, if there's any other public comments. Sweet. I appreciate you coming. Do we want to finalize what needs to be on the agenda for our next meeting? Because we had things that we're scattering.
Dr. Newman got back to me. He's currently reaching out to the groups that do the soil sampling, and he's in the middle of writing a grant for those events. So he said just to hold tight and he'd keep us updated, so
Okay.
I don't have anything to add.
So not for the next meeting unless we hear.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the coyote, did we get the,
I mean, I have those PDFs. I don't know if we want to alter them or just kind of post them on. We were wondering if we could post them on the city website as just kind of,
okay, so we don't need to put
Informative.
that on the next meeting either.
yeah.
Okay. All right, then we are good to go. Thank you so much. We are done, Steve.